In our previous recording, we discussed the structures that exist within systems to cause problems within organizations. We also discussed how to illustrate these with causal loop diagrams and distinguished between reinforcing loops and balancing loops. This recording will focus on the archetypal patterns that can manifest within an organization consistently in various shapes, forms, and ways. Why would we study these system archetypes? Well, they do make systems thinking visible, and they can recur frequently, and they are easily transferable from situation to situation. They can help us shift our focus from blame to inquiry. It can help us really get those aha moments that can add value to our consultation. And once we know the story and map them out, they're much easier to communicate. And this allows us to go deeper into the problem and draw out implications where we can find the high leverage in the system as we build interventions. System archetypes are really classic stories or templates. And the value of these templates is that once you understand them in familiar situations, which, by the way, is very similar to the themes that we see in classic movies and how themes can repeat themselves from movie to movie. But once we understand these, you can transfer your understanding to new and very different situations. And when you recognize a classic story in a new situation, you can more readily communicate the system structure behind the problem and more effectively identify high leverage interventions. Now, there are a number of these, and they're all sort of related within the family tree of structural issues that can occur within an organization. We discussed in the previous recording the issues around vicious and virtuous cycles, which are part of the reinforcing loops. And we did talk about balancing processes as well. So we're going to go through a few of these other ones that tend to appear on a consistent basis. Let's start with fixes that backfire. So here, the symptom is that the usual solution to a regularly occurring problem that has always worked before does not seem to be working this time. The general story is there's a regularly occurring symptom, such as budget overruns or missing deadlines. A fix is applied, and it works in the short run. And in the long run, however, the fix has unforeseen consequences, which make the symptom worse. More of a fix is required, or the fix has to be used more often. The structure here is a short-term loop. It's a balancing loop. And the longer-term consequence is an embedded reinforcing structure. So the fix addresses the symptom, but not the problem. The reinforcing loop in the longer term, usually which is not obvious, but it dominates the behavior of the structure. The habit of focusing on the short term and addressing symptoms makes it harder to consider the long term and the real nature of the problem. So we need to reframe and address the root. We have to give up the fix that works only on the symptom. And we need to increase awareness of the unintended consequences and get them out on the table and manage them. Here's a quick example. Medicaid was established to provide medical coverage for people without medical insurance. When the plan was established, the number of eligible people was small. As medical costs have risen, however, the number of people who are without medical insurance has increased. Because the federal-state split of costs, Congress has continued to expand the size of Medicaid coverage. It has less impact on the national deficit than other programs, and it looks good to the constituents. Unfortunately, the long-term impact of increasing Medicaid coverage is to raise the cost of medical care for non-Medicaid patients. Medicaid pays only 1/2 to 1/3 what private insurers pay. Doctors see fewer Medicaid patients, which diverts the rest to the more expensive facilities of hospital emergency rooms. In addition, since hospitals receive smaller payments for Medicaid patients, they pass their deficit along to other private patients and ultimately to insurance companies. A vicious cycle sets in as insurance companies pay more for insured patients' care and raise their rates. As rates go up, fewer people can afford medical insurance, and the number of people without medical coverage and potentially eligible for Medicaid goes up also. The next one we'll cover is shifting the burden. Here the symptom is a problem symptom occurs regularly, usually as the result of feeling pressured. A person or group comes up with a solution, the quick fix, that really only addresses the symptom and not the underlying problem. The quick fix represents the path of least resistance. Concern about cost and time push energy toward the quick fix and the reduction of distress. Giving attention to the internal long-term sources of the problem is postponed or ignored. The quick fix comes to be used quite regularly. People eventually depend on it, consider it normal, and assume it will always be there. Attention is not given to the underlying structural sources of problems, since the short-term fixes alleviate the symptoms. Unfortunately, the quick fix is also likely to have side effects, which weaken the natural ability of the system to correct problems. So the system becomes dependent on or addicted to the quick fix, and its internal ability to help itself is disabled and atrophies. Two coupled balancing loops, the quick fix and the long-term change, and an outside reinforcing loop, the unseen effects. Typically, there are delays in the long-term change loop. Shifting the burden is a close cousin of fixes that backfire. In shifting, a better solution is apparent. So here's an example. Nobody but me could possibly handle this position. So senior managers in a fast-moving service company are trying to grow junior managers. The senior managers are concerned that the younger managers are not yet able to deal effectively with crisis because they lack experience. Consequently, the senior managers find it necessary and expeditious to step in regularly to diffuse crises. With fewer severe crises to handle, the junior managers have had little experience to develop their problem-solving skills. They feel under-equipped to deal with several severe crises and have come to rely more and more on help from senior management. As an unintended consequence, junior managers with higher potential leave for better opportunities as senior managers continue to assert themselves. So here you can see the short term is easy, the long term is hard. If overall vision or goals are missing, short-term focus takes over. Short-term solutions can erode long-term capability, so it's useful to focus on the long term and the solution. Sometimes the best approach is only support the long-term solution, sort of go cold turkey on the short term, to pay attention to dependency on the short-term fix as you strengthen long-term capability. You should also be looking for mental models that tend to perpetuate the dependence on the quick fix. The next one, very common, is called limits to success. Here, the symptom, things are booming, growth is the focus, and no one wants to worry about problems that don't even exist yet, like what to do when the boom slows down. Somewhat later, when a few problems crop up, no one worries about their long-term implications, and the chosen solution is to go back to doing what worked before. Eventually, it seems that the harder everyone works, the more they seem to stay in the same place. So the generic story here is there's a boom, accelerating growth and performance. Everyone works hard to keep the growth and improved performance going. In some cases, the growth mysteriously levels off. Even though everyone works harder and harder and keeps doing what worked so well before, the earlier boom does not return. In other cases, the growth takes a sudden, nasty nosedive into losses and collapse. Usually the old tactics and working hard also fails to turn the tide. A reinforcing loop, which is the growth loop here, coupled with a balancing loop, the limiting or resisting loop, the loops may be coupled in different ways, as you can see from the dotted line in the figure below. So, quick example, a new shopping mall. So the new suburban mall really took off. Pretty soon, the developer was adding new space for the merchants who wanted to locate there. However, traffic congestion and the difficulty in parking eventually slowed the growth. So here, the archetype of the class is the classic life cycle curve of growth and maturation. Nothing grows forever. In any situation, there are multiple limiting forces. Some are visible and some are not. Doing more of what worked in the past can make the crash worse. The leverage is in managing the limiting forces. There is rarely leverage in pushing harder on the growth loop. So we have to anticipate the slowing forces and address them early before they are felt. The next one we'll talk about is escalation. So here, you keep wishing the competitor or your opponent or other department or other person would slow down so you, your group, or your company could stop the battle and get some other work done. So the general story here is every time one player makes a move, the other tries to top it. Two or more parties base their separate activity levels on the other's activity. A looks at its results in comparison to B's and takes action accordingly. If A sees that B's efforts have risen, A raises its efforts and vice versa. Simultaneously, B compares its results to A's and takes action accordingly. This dynamic creates an ever-escalating or de-escalating spiral of activity. And so you can see here below, there's a pair of coupled balancing loops. Give you a quick example. A classic one, obviously, is the arms race concept. Here you have two countries are traditional enemies, but have avoided open warfare for generations. However, each one is determined to maintain sufficient military capabilities to protect itself in the event of future conflict. Immediately after the last war, both countries found themselves with depleted weapon supplies. Assyria began to slowly replenish its supply of vehicles and basic attack weapons. The leader of Samaria ordered a similar initiative when its spies notified him of the first country's activities. In addition, Samaria's leader ordered the construction of new defensive capabilities. When Assyria heard that what Samaria was doing, it decided to develop weapon systems to penetrate the new defenses. Samaria became concerned at its loss of parity and ordered double last year's production of new weapons. By the end of the next generation, both countries had enough weaponry to overrun each other, as well as a number of smaller allied countries. At that point, the smaller allies decided to improve their military might. So this is a classic story. It's it's important to create full awareness of the structure that's going on, the activity levels, and its costs. When these happen in organizations, you should look for ways for all parties to win or achieve their objectives. Invite parties to agree to a balanced situation and somehow slow the rate of escalation, and if necessary, to lead to de-escalate unilaterally. Another very common structure is called drifting goals. So here the symptom is that performance standards are allowed to slide just till this crisis, quarter, special project, whatever, is over. The general story here is when the current level of performance is unable to meet the goal, the desired performance, there's a gap, and that increases the need to improve. The substantive corrected action needs a significant amount of time to take effect. Under pressure, the alternate solution is to adjust, usually to lower the desired performance goal, which relieves the pressure. Unfortunately, without pressure, the need to take long-term corrective action is now reduced. Continued poor performance may result in continued lowering of the goal, and the system tends toward lower and lower levels of performance. A pair of coupled balancing loops, you can see here. The upper one represents the pressure relieving process of changing the goal. The lower one represents the longer-term corrective action. This same structure can work in reverse, goal escalation. As the gap is reduced, pressure increases to raise the desired performance level, and the gap opens again. Drifting goals is a balancing loop with a goal that has gone awry. Instead of being fixed, the goal has become variable and is under the influence of the very condition for which it was supposed to be a fixed standard. It is also a special case of the fixes that backfire. Quick example. Michael has joined weight observers and determined that he wants to hit a target weight of 150 pounds. He is currently 215 pounds. With great fortitude, he manages to lose 10 pounds in the first 6 weeks of his dieting program. However, after a month, he only manages to lose another 3 pounds. Somewhat dismayed, he decides to be more realistic about his target weight and resets it to 185. After a month of dieting, finds him still over 200 pounds, Michael takes a hard look at his lack of progress and gives it one more shot. At 200 pounds, Mike decides that it's the best he can do, and given his age and lifestyle, settles on the target weight of 200. Here, some ways to look at this is to hold on to the vision and keep the goal steady. If current performance is below standard, keep the corrective action within the lower loop, such as the focused on improving the performance and not changing the standard. The next illustration will be called Success to the Successful. So here, the symptom is one of a pair or more of related activities, groups, or individuals is doing very well. The other is struggling and eventually collapses. So this general story is that you have two or more activities, groups, or individuals compete for shares of a common limited resource, whether it be time, funds, attention, space, food, whatever. As activity A has greater success, the allocation of resources to A increases. As the allocation of resources to A increases, the allocation of resources to B decreases. B's success diminishes. In light of B's diminished success, the allocation of resources to A is increased. Now, so you can see here it's a pair of coupled reinforcing loops. One is virtuous and the other one is vicious. So here's a quick example. So Les and Fran were new employees, both from top MBA programs. Les was quiet, great with numbers and models, and spent a lot of time in front of the computer. Fran had wide-ranging interests, a quick wit, and spent time getting to know people in the other corporate finance groups. After the first few weeks on the job, their manager noticed difficulty getting Les to participate at staff meetings. Well, Fran was ready with amusing quips and insights regarding improving audit quality. Les was assigned the role of culling through sector LRPs for budget inconsistencies, while Fran was given the opportunity to join a task force charged with developing a new product pricing process. At the end of the year, visibility and contribution had earned Fran an early review and salary increase, while Les was given a lateral transfer to one of the sector staffs that would eventually be unfunded. So what's going on here? We should look for the overarching goal that links the achievement of both entities. We need to think about breaking or weakening the resource link between the entities to eliminate competition, especially if the linkage was inadvertent. To measure the individual potential of each activity and base resource allocation on potential as well as on demonstrated success, and to look for additional resources if both activities merit investment. Another classic story is the tragedy of the commons. There used to be, so here's the symptom, is there used to be plenty of some resource for everyone's use, but it seems to be disappearing or losing quality. Users intensify their efforts to keep getting their share of the resource. The generic story here is that a commonly available but limited resource is exploited as if it were solely owned by each user. Limitations to the resource are not known, not attended to, or not considered relevant. Each user focuses on his or her own activity and gains from that activity without regard for the activity of other users. Eventually, there are diminishing or negative returns to each user. The loss cannot be turned around as long as even one user ignores the whole picture. The structure is fairly complex. Two or more limits to growth templates joined by the total activity and limited by the gain possible per activity. The commons in the title refers to the village commons where anyone could graze animals without limit. It was an unmanaged resource. Individuals tended to increase their herds even after the limit of the common was reached. The cost of the diminishing nourishment of the commons grazing was distributed across everyone's herds, and it seemed less to each individual than the cost of foregoing more animals. The loop consists of two or more limits to success loops with the same dynamic. The reinforcing process is what people pay attention to. The longer-term limiting process is what eventually destroys the common resource. Quick example. So here, plant purchasing maintained a small pool of purchasing agents to support two product lines that were trying to improve the JIT inventory control. The agent pool had been shared by both product line managers for quite some time. Agents were assigned to respond to one or the other set of product line specifications based on the ebb and flow of forecasted volumes. As each manager increased his or her commitment to JIT, each demanded more support from his or her favorite purchasing agent. Agents began to work 60-hour weeks, but were still spread too thin to satisfy either manager. Agents found themselves in a lose-lose position. Morale plummeted and sick leave increased. Both lines began experiencing high WIP. So what is this? The strategies here to combat this is to figure how to manage the common resource when traditional economics may not work. Bring attention to the collective costs of individual actions. Sometimes just close off the common to allow it to replenish or regenerate. Official regulation is often required in these situations. And then to focus on the greater common good or vision. Another extremely common archetype is accidental adversaries. Here the symptom is when partners turn into bitter enemies, when a win-win situation becomes unintentionally dominated by adversarial behavior. The general story here is you have two groups have chosen to work together because they can mutually support each other's success. If the alliance works, both groups will gain increasing success. The problem arises when one or both parties are not satisfied with its current performance and take corrective measures that unintentionally obstructs their partner's success. You might see this in situations in companies like marketing versus sales or operations versus corporate and on and on. The structure here is the outer reinforcing loop is the intended cooperation. An inner balancing loop shows each side's attempt to improve their results. These are linked to form a damaging reinforcing loop. Somehow you got to get the groups together to see the whole picture, to strengthen the mutual understanding of each other's needs and the criteria by which each of you defines success. To remove or weaken the constraints in your partner's system that make your own solution harmful, and to reaffirm the intent of the partnership and acknowledge that the damage was done unintentionally. The last one I want to go through quickly is called mental models. These tend to permeate all of the structures. So mental models are the beliefs, assumptions, and models that we have about every aspect of ourselves, others, our organizations, and how the world works. So here's two quick examples of how it would play out. So you have this belief that says, I think meetings are a waste of time. So, and then your action would be, I attend, but I don't actively participate. And then the agenda items are not completed. And then you go back to the meetings are a waste of time, and you go through this cycle. You might have a belief that senior management is out of touch, so I'll do whatever I want, which means that management is not informed, which means they continue to be out of touch. So it's our belief systems that drive our actions, that drive results, which can lead to the creation of these archetypal problems. One last one would be, a manager makes assumptions that the subordinates don't care. Manager gets frustrated, pushes their views, so the subordinates feel conflicted, and the subordinates withhold comments, and they don't challenge, and they withdraw, which means that the manager continues to assume they don't care. So these mental models are very archetypal and something that needs to be studied as you're going through your consultation with a client, because they are considered a critical part of this system. We're going to stop there. I hope you found these interesting, and I do thank you for your time and attention.